the ratings dropped significantly. 25 million viewers last year for Michigan, Washington. This past year, Corey, was 22.1 million in the first ever 12-team playoff. And there's a thread on the Tribal Council talking about this. And I kind of hopped in there. People wondering, why did it drop? And, maybe it's because there wasn't any Southern representation, but there wasn't any Southern representation last year, and that didn't seem to bother it. And to me, man, Florida State's my favorite team. It's my alma mater, but I love college football far and away more than any other sport. So even with Florida State not being great this year, I still cared about other games going on across the country, and I wanted to see how the playoff was going to work out with 12 teams, and I was thoroughly unimpressed. Man, there's something that just felt lacking about the entire process. There was great games, and the Texas-Arizona State game was awesome. The Notre Dame-Penn State game was pretty good. Pretty much all the games Ohio State played, and it was horrible. But there's enough games in there. Like, all right, this wasn't too bad. But when you start thinking about how long it was, the last game of the regular season was almost 60 days between rivalry week and then the national champion being crowned. Yeah. And I just felt like we thought that maybe the regular season was going to get diluted because it was all about making the playoff and you could lose and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But it's hard to shake that because it's ingrained in us. We've been watching college football for so long. We realize no matter what, man, you still have to win all your games, man. That's at least you had to until last year. But I digress. And then I started thinking, Corey, what I think maybe made me the most irritated about the entire story, it wasn't the lack of games on campus, which I think they're going to have to address. It wasn't the seeding, which I think they're going to have to address. The buys, I think once they go to 16, hopefully they'll get away with it. Just get rid of it and just go 1 to 16 and go 1 versus 16, Duke versus 15, et cetera, et cetera. But what really irritated me the most was the fact that Ohio State's a national champion, and Ohio State lost the last game of the regular season. And they lost it to their arch rival, maybe the most bitter rivalry in all of college football, some might say, Corey. They lost not only to their bitter rival, but they lost at home. And I went and looked back at it, Corey. Going all the way back to 1974, here are the only teams that lost to their arch rival. None of them, though, lost to them at home. 1983, Miami, they lost the first game of the year at the Swamp. We have to go 13 more years for another instance. The Florida Gators win the national championship. They lose the last game of the regular season, but it was on the road to their arch rival, Florida State. And if it wasn't for the advent of these stupid conference championship games, Florida wouldn't have been in the national title game. Yeah. I digress. 2003, if you want to go there, you can. LSU, they lost at home against Florida. But I don't consider Florida their arch
rivals. Yeah,
and it was the sixth game of the season. It wasn't even in November.
Really, Florida and Miami shouldn't be considered arch rivals because Florida wouldn't play them for 2 decades.
And it was the first game of the year.
Yeah.
2011, Alabama lost at home to LSU on that ugly 9-6 overtime game. But I don't consider
not an arch rival.
No, and it was 3 more games left in the season. 2017, Alabama did lose to Auburn in the Iron Bowl, but it was at Auburn. It comes to Ohio State's the only national champion that I was able to go back in the last 50 years that lost to their arch rival at home. And they also lost another game, too. And I'm not debating the fact that they ended up being the best. They're the most talented team in the country. But it feels like the way college football was for so long, there wasn't a postseason per se, Corey. You played one more game. You played just one more game, and then we figured everything out by everybody else playing one more game. Having to play like 4, they played the equivalent of another quarter of a season, Notre Dame and Ohio State. When Texas beat Arizona State, that was an incredible game. All I could think about was like, good luck, Texas. You got to do this 2 more times. And they couldn't. It's attrition. But credit to Ohio State. They had injuries on their offensive line. They were able to shift things around and still win the national title. But maybe we just have to learn, me personally, I have to learn how to pace my emotions throughout the course of a college football season. But just so much about the way it kind of ended up falling this season, it felt very underwhelming for something that seemed on paper was going to be an incredible boon for the sport.
Yeah, I think it is. I think you're looking at it from how it ended up, and I agree with you. It's a bummer that, like I've said before, the kick 6 wouldn't have mattered at all in this era. Like, Alabama fans would have just been kind of laughing and that's a ridiculous way to lose a game. Who do we got in the first round?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, we can rest up. We don't have to play in the SEC championship game. That's a crazy way to lose, though. How did Saban? But it doesn't matter. We'll still win the national championship. We're not scared of that Florida State team. You know, it takes obviously it takes some of the import away from these rivalry games or just regular season in general. But the flip side of that is, in the middle of November, of this past November, there were legitimately 20 teams still alive to theoretically win a national championship. Colorado, Kansas State, Alabama, Ole Miss, and those are just the teams that didn't get in.
Yeah.
There's probably 2 or 3. UNLV, for crying out loud.
Miami.
And there's Miami. So literally that's 7 teams we just mentioned, I think, 6 or 7 teams. And there are 12 that are get in. So that, to me, is great for the sport. That's great for the sport that Indiana and SMU and Arizona State made it. Boise State made it. Wish those games they had played had been better, but it's fine. It's just part of sports. But look, man, it's just college football, I think, is kind of caught up. I agree with you. I miss the way it used to be. But the way it used to be, like when I was growing up in the 80s, was just utterly stupid. Yeah. It's just stupid. It was absolutely stupid that there would be 2 undefeated teams at the end of the regular season that would not play each other.
Yeah.
Georgia Tech and Clemson, or Georgia Tech and Colorado, they weren't even undefeated. Why couldn't they play each other? Instead, they split it. Michigan, Michigan, Nebraska, Miami, Washington. Like you had these split national titles, which like, why wasn't Miami playing Washington? And also, so it just, and if you lost a game, if you happen to be Florida State in 1997, and you choke away the game at the Swamp against a very talented Florida team, by the way, and you have a lead, you blow it in the final minute, you lose by 3 points on the road in a feverish atmosphere. Oh, well, your season was a waste. Like, that's not great either. I didn't necessarily appreciate that. Maybe as a Florida State fan, I think it's kind of.
I'm not anti-playoff, but they've.
No, it's like I get it. It's almost, to me, it makes me angry that the people that matter couldn't have figured this out 40 years ago. Because if they had, Florida State would have 8 national championships. At least 7 or 6. Like, you know what I mean? They would have doubled their national championship. They'd have won it in 92. Might have won it in 91. Might have won it in 97. Yeah. In 2000. Well, you can't say that. They lost to Oklahoma. So, but there were other, to 2023. Who knows? But no, they had to wait. Yeah, that's right. 2014.
It was a playoff, but
Yeah, but still, it was ridiculous. They had to go play Oregon in California.
Seeding,
yeah, ridiculous seating. So I get it. Like it takes away the really kind of the anxiety and tension of a game like that. Like that's why I couldn't. I know Ohio State fans were upset. I get it. It sucks to lose to your rival. But even when it happened, and all this talk about Ryan Day losing his job, I'm like, he might win the national championship, and he did.